Hey everyone, and welcome to the Cheyenne Hills Podcast, Verse by Verse. We know it's often hard to find time to spend studying God's Word, so we're happy you can join us as we read, unpack, and discuss Scripture every Tuesday and Thursday. We hope you enjoy the program.
Across the street and around the world, Cheyenne Hills.
Well, hello there. Welcome to our Cheyenne Hills podcast, Verse by Verse. We are going through Genesis. I am René Minder. I'm the executive minister here at Cheyenne Hills Church. I have Ken Will with me, who is our resident theologian, as well as Austin Miesner, our youth director. And we're here today to just go through Genesis. We have looked at Joseph's life. We are, if this were an action movie, we are at the climax. And so we have seen where Joseph was in charge of the grain and helped store grain during the good years, and then is distributing it while the whole world is in famine. And we have seen where his brothers all of a sudden come in to see him and they bow before him. And so we recognize that first dream that Joseph had when he was a young boy has all of a sudden come true. And so we are starting now in Genesis 42, verses 8.
And Joseph recognized his brothers, but they did not recognize him. And Joseph remembered the dreams that he had dreamed of them. And he said to them, "You are spies. You have come to see the nakedness of my land." They said to him, "No, my lord, your servants have come to buy food. We are all sons of one man. We are honest men. Your servants have never been spies." I find that funny. We are honest men.
Yeah.
Like, no, we are honest people.
Yeah,
No,
they're trying to convince themselves too, I think.
Just like today, I'm a good person. I'm a good person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know.
Like I try, like that's what we talk about. We're constantly trying to remind students that we're not good people without Jesus.
Yeah.
Like when we, at the moment we think all of a sudden, yes, I'm good. I helped a little old lady across the street. like that, yeah. So like you only did that for some selfish reason. You wanted the merit badge for the Boy Scouts, or like take your pick of something. But like we see here, we were kind of talking about it last week of my revelation of the significance of the first revelation and the dream. But Joseph in verse 8 and 9, right here, he says, "And Joseph remembered the dreams that he had dreamed of them, and he said to them that." So like the moment he's like, "Oh hey." Like, I remember this from 5 chapters ago. Well, it wasn't for them. It was almost 20 years ago. I remember this dream now. And then for him, it almost seems like revenge almost at the moment, because it would almost indicate like, oh my gosh, nope. What René said was wrong. He hasn't forgot. He's like, I got the whip now, and we're going to town. Like, yes, this is my turn. And so I just think it's really interesting that he himself does it, and they won't recognize until obviously later. But starting again in verse 12, he said to them, "No, it is the nakedness of the land that you have come to see." And they said, "We, your servants, are 12 brothers, the sons of one man in the land of Canaan. And behold, the youngest is this day with our father, and one is no more." But Joseph said to them, "It is as I said to you, you are spies. By this you shall be tested. By the life of Pharaoh you shall not go from this place unless your youngest brother comes here. Send one of you and let him bring your brother while you remain confined, that your words may be tested, whether there is truth in you, or else by the life of Pharaoh surely you are spies." And he put them all together in custody for 3 days. One of the things, I don't know, as reading this, I noticed is the nakedness aspect that he brings forth. Twice, right? Like he did in 9 and then again in 12, and tying that all the way back. So I wasn't even here yet. All the way back to earlier this year in Genesis, one of the first sins was what was it? Ham that looked upon Noah.
His father.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we see that so even amongst Egyptians, I think it's really the way God has put his laws and his sins in our heart, like that. To use that phrase and say, well, you've come to see the barrenness of our land and how shameful and how bad that is for one another. And it's like to any nationalist, I guess at the time, that would make sense. Well, I don't want you to see this. This is terrible. And think of how we would try to hide those things that are wrong in our lives from those who might be coming to kind of gawk and do something. But again, that's just my brain blabber from while I'm reading. Didn't know if you guys had anything in those things. Verse 18, on the third day, Joseph said to them, "Do this and you will live, for I fear God. If you are honest men, let one of your brothers remain confined where you are in custody, and let the rest go and carry grain for the famine of your households. And bring your youngest brother to me, so your words will be verified, and you shall not die. And they did so. They said to one another, in truth, we are guilty concerning our brother, and that we saw the distress of his soul when he begged us, and we did not listen. That is why this distress has come upon us. And Reuben answered them, did I not tell you not to sin against the boy? But you did not listen. So now there comes a reckoning for his blood. They did not know that Joseph understood them, for there was an interpreter between them. Then he turned away from them and wept, and he returned to them and spoke to them, and he took Simeon from them and bound them before their eyes.
I think it's interesting here that Joseph is, it's like all of a sudden he's remembered, even though he had drawn this line, I'm going to forget about my family. All of a sudden he's presented with his brothers right before him. And he's like, he's trying to test and see whether his younger brother is still alive or whether they did to his younger brother of what they did to him. And I think it's just really interesting how it's kind of this back and forth dialogue of putting them in prison and listening in on what they're saying. I thought it was really interesting is that they're in prison and they're trying to figure out why they're there. And there could have been a lot of reasons why we're there. Well, he said they're spies. He could have said it's because we're Hebrews. He could have said it's because we're tall, dark, and handsome. Instead, what they zeroed in on was their guilt. It was like they remembered years before when they had taken Joseph and threw him in the pit. It was like their guilt came to the surface again.
Yeah.
And I think that's interesting about how our guilt, we cannot ever shove our guilt down far enough. We hope to, but we just can't.
Well, I think it also probably points to the fact of how much that one decision actually affected despite how much territory Jacob had, how did that affect Jacob to the point where they know, to the fact that when we started reading 42 last time, that it was, Jacob's like, nope, I'm not sending Benjamin now because of what happened to my other son. What happened to my favorite son, I'm not letting my youngest now go because of that. And so we see just like that what I would call the snowball effect of all of a sudden they're like, maybe connecting, we try to blame God sometimes, but they're on doing it on a massive scale. Well, because of this 20 some odd years ago, now all of a sudden we are reaping the rewards in due time for what we did.
Yeah.
So,
and you said something about guilt. What were you?
Yeah. A pastor that I heard years ago made an appropriate statement. I thought he said, time does not erase guilt. Maybe grief will fade over time. Happiness fades over time, obviously. Several different emotions fade over time, but guilt does not. I mean, we can kind of suppress it or try and avoid it, but circumstance arises and boom, it's right back there. And here in this case, there.
Well, I think that even points to the greater truth of that guilt is eternal. Right. So even like before sin, with sin and any sin, the guilt for that is eternal. Like the only way it's paid is by death, and ultimately pointing then forward to Jesus. If he's the only eternal payment that could cover that eternal debt that we owe because of the guilt. I don't know, that's a really apt statement, I think.
Well, and I just see how important it is for us to confess and ask for forgiveness daily, whenever appropriate, whenever we have these guilt feelings, go to another person, ask for forgiveness. Guilt is something that really stagnates our spiritual growth, stagnates our relationships with others. And I think that's interesting that they knew their guilt was right there at the surface. Right there at the surface. They didn't dance around and try to find other reasons why they were in prison. They had this guilty feeling. This is because of what we did to Joseph. And what I love here is that they didn't realize that Joseph could understand, and this confession, he could see that their guilt, a pathological person would not feel this guilt. Mm-hmm. And so he knew that they felt guilty about it, and their confession caused him to break down and cry. I think that, that had to be so powerful. I don't know whether he was thankful that he could hear their confession or whether just the sound of it, it broke his heart that they realized what they did was wrong.
Yeah, and I think before we kind of close this, I think pointing out the fact that he took Simeon, and not Reuben or not any of the others. Like, and the reason why he did that is because, like, as we saw back, Reuben actually was trying to make provision for Joseph all the way back when he got first thrown into the pit. Like, he had left. He wasn't actually a part of the party who did the I don't know, hog tying, so to speak, and throwing him in there. Like, he came back and saw this and then left to go get some supplies to get him out of the situation. And so he takes my commentary, as we were talking about earlier, says he kept hostage not Reuben, who was the firstborn of Jacob, but Simeon, who was the oldest brother who willingly participated in the crimes against Joseph. And so he's taking the person who would have been responsible legally also
Right.
In that time frame.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So very good. So any personal applications? We've kind of talked around about it, but any further thoughts here?
Well, just as far as confession to those we've offended and confession to God. I mean, it's a healing of the soul to confess. So.
Yeah, I think that's the big one, because I think Romans 1 is a common passage that I always go to when talking with students and just unbelievers. You know, when you know you did something wrong. Guilt is not, God put guilt into mankind not because he wanted us to feel terrible, but because he wanted to point to something greater out there. And unfortunately, in humanity and in sin, you know, we have offered idols, and we offer we do human sacrifice, and we do all these other things that we've created in other religions. But the whole reason for guilt was to point to, hey, there is somebody out there who can actually take that away. There is somebody who you are accountable to. And so, yeah, I think that's a huge part of this.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Just how weighty this guilt was for them, that they had been carrying it for years and years and years, and how weighty in my own life, how it's this rock that's around my neck when I don't confess, when I don't go make things right to other people, when I don't ask God for forgiveness, that there's this guilt. And I do think that the other thing that I kind of see too is that he is testing his brothers. And so when there's been broken fellowship and you forgive them, that doesn't mean that you necessarily trust them. Mm-hmm. It means that they have to earn that trust back. And I think it's here that he's testing
really wants
them.
to know.
Yeah, he really wants to know their heart motives.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's why he cried, is that all of a sudden this revelation that they feel that guilt of what they did to him.
Yeah, whereas as somebody who would accuse, continue to accuse him, if they hadn't felt that guilt, they could be, well, you were so uppity and you were just the favorite and you acted that way. And if they really felt like that, they could have said, well, that's the reason why we did it. Like, if you wouldn't have done that, we wouldn't have thrown you in a pit. Yeah. Like you snarky little turd. Like, that's the way I kind of see it. But like, there's even those people in our lives who, like, we forgive them. Oh, sorry. We forgive them. And then they don't want to come. They're like, well, thanks for your forgiveness. But if you wouldn't have done this, I wouldn't have had to do that. And then it's like, you're almost like, well, you're still feeling guilty about something, obviously, because you're not willing to just lay it down and let's move on in fellowship.
Right.
So.
Right. And the fact that, so in our moments when someone comes and when we hear someone confess about something wrong that they did to us, we have some choices to make. We can weep and be broken and want restoration, or Joseph could have gone in and he could have demolished them all. And felt justified. He could have justified his actions. Instead, he wept. And that really shows how his heart was after God, that he was broken because he sensed their guilt. And so when someone comes to us and asks for forgiveness, or we hear that someone feels really guilty about something, our response is really key also. All right. Well,
leave it on that cliffhanger.
Yeah, we'll leave it on that. Yeah, so Simeon's going to be in jail. Now what's going to happen? So anyway, thank you so much for joining us, and we hope to see you next time.